So I knew she was the one from the moment she walked up to me and shook my hand, but where do you feel like you knew I was the one?
Do you remember the story about the cockroach? I had just moved into a little tiny apartment that was like a bird's nest way up on the third floor, and I thought it was safe, but it was a sketchy part of town. And I happened to see a roach, a big giant roach on the wall.
Which changes with
Big giant roach.
time.
But it was a flying roach, so they were very scary. And I grabbed my flip phone at the time and called Brian. And I was yelling and telling him to come save me from this roach, to come kill it, because I was not going to get anywhere near it. I was just...
tell what she was saying. It was blood-curdling screams. It took about like a minute to finally be able to hear the word roach and know that, oh, she's being murdered by a roach or something. So I had to drive, and unfortunately she moved somewhere like real far from me. So I think I had that 30-minute drive I did in like 15 minutes.
There I was, trying to make sure it didn't escape, and I was watching it, and he came in and he started to battle the roach.
Yeah, I was trying to kill it, and it literally flew off the wall straight to the ground, and all I remember is like it disappeared. We couldn't find it.
And then I was not going to stay there until he found it. So I was like, if you don't find this roach, I'm moving out. Like, that is it. And you found it.
It took us some time, and I finally found it in her fireplace, and that's when I finally was able to kill the thing for her. But I guess that's how you knew.
That's when I knew, because it was that knight in shining armor. You came right away, and even it felt like a really long time. And then you took care of it, and then you saved me.
So kill the roach.
It was very
It would be
chivalrous.
a knight in shining armor.
Think y'all could turn on the mics? I think the mics aren't on yet. I think that roach anyways is somewhere in Area 51 with Wolverine and the X-Men. Well, I want to, well, it's not on yet. I think he's working on it. You get it over there? I just have to talk louder. It was working earlier. Let's see. Testing.
Is it? Oh, there it is. Okay, awesome. We don't have to hold it except for each other, right? I'm excited to be able to do this. I'm thankful for my wife. For most of y'all that don't know, she's a teacher, so she already works $1,000 a week. But on top of that, she is getting her master's to become an LPC, and so she's like always working. So she had like 2 days to prepare everything on her side, and she was able to get that going. But our topic today is going to be persevering through boundaries. And I know that some of y'all may hear the word boundaries and cringe, but to persevere in our marriages, we must have boundaries in place. So those of you who have had a toddler probably know that you don't let them go anywhere they want to in the house, right? And as a parent, we know we have to set boundaries to protect them. So we are protecting them from the unknown because they're not aware of the things that could potentially hurt or kill them.
It says in Jude 21, stay always within the boundaries of where God's love can reach and bless you. Also in Psalm 74, it says, you establish all the boundaries of the earth.
And so what we want you to see is that if you're called to be image bearers, then we are to live within the boundaries that the Lord has set in place. And you see, we are still God's children, and if He established boundaries, we need to stop living in a way as if we reach peak maturity.
Also, we're going to take a look at Matthew 18:3, and He said, truly I tell you.
Yeah, that's fine.
Testing. Matthew 18:3, and He said, truly I tell you, unless you change and become like little children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven.
Sorry, guys. New equipment, right? Is that working better? Oh. No, it's not. Okay. Well, sure. So your mind has to be transformed, right? To see yourself as a child of God, so that you can learn to accept the boundaries that are placed on your life and that you need in your marriage. So does anyone wait to lock their house only after someone breaks into it? Do you have those people in here? So this is much of the mindset that we have in marriage about setting boundaries. We don't want to look controlling or insecure. We just wait until something bad happens to then set a boundary. So imagine saying, I don't want to lock my front door and look paranoid to my neighbors, right? So I'll just leave it unlocked until something happens. And it sounds crazy, right? But this is what we do in our covenants. And so who do you think wants you to have those loose boundaries, right? Or he has you justify your situation to prevent a boundary to occur. So one of the many premarital topics I cover is boundaries. And it doesn't matter the age of the couple, they usually have horrible boundaries set for their marriage. And how my first marriage failed was because I didn't want to look like the controlling husband. And everyone would tell me, oh, your wife, is so in love with you, y'all are gonna make it. And so, in her life, I let her have guy friends. She had them at work, in college, and although it bothered me in some ways, I didn't place any boundaries because I thought it would make her more prone to want to break past it, and that I'd look like a controlling husband. So, but because we are sinful people, we will sin the most when boundaries are not set. And this is why God placed boundaries for his people, because he knows what we are prone to do in our sin. And so if you think about boundaries in daily life, most of y'all, have them, you'll see them at your jobs, because, people are prone to do the wrong thing. And either you're one of those people who do the wrong thing, or you're one looking at the other people doing the wrong thing.
Well, just imagine if you took a job in which you were supposed to guard the property with your life, and then they'll hold you responsible if whatever happens, if something goes wrong. Well, if they don't tell you what the boundary lines are on the property, this is no different than how we treat our covenant and in our marriage. And so we are called to stay faithful and protect our marriage, but most don't know what the boundary lines are. So it often leads to destruction in their lives and the legacies that we leave behind in future generations.
So before we start, I want to explain protecting your covenant and what that means. So this isn't about putting a boundary on your wife or putting a boundary on your husband. Again, it's about protecting the covenant. And so before God, and what we did when we got married was there was a covenant built between us and the Lord. And most people think it's like, I have to place this boundary on my wife so she doesn't cheat, or she'll think I got to place a boundary on him so I don't cheat. But what we need to start seeing it as is that there's this covenant before the Lord that we need to protect. And if we can think of it that way, it won't look like a controlling, thing in our lives and in our marriages. So now he's going to start kind of explaining some of the boundaries set. One of those are, before we start, I just wanted to kind of say, we need to make sure that our spouse never becomes a 49ers fan. That's one of the boundaries set in marriage. Just real quick. Amen. But here's some of those.
So here are some of the boundaries that are in the Bible for God's people. Number one is moral boundaries. This is found where the 10 Commandments are. 2, sexual boundaries. In Leviticus, the Lord sets very clear moral boundaries on sex. 3, boundaries of worship. Idolatry, right? Nobody should have another God before the Lord. 4, geographical and social boundaries. This is where we see the example of the Israelites in the Promised Land and how they should interact with others. And then 5, boundaries for priests and kings, which is talking about leadership and authority.
And so as we continue, keep this in mind that boundaries are not a one and done thing. They should evolve and grow with your marriage. So as we're discussing these boundaries, you need to kind of keep that in mind. And then as we continue discussing these boundaries, consider how your children will adopt the same boundaries that you establish. So what parents, I always have this saying that that I share in counseling. It's what parents do in moderation, children will do in excess. So if your boundaries aren't that good and you're stepping over lines that they shouldn't be, you're establishing what it looks like for them. And they're gonna cross the line of what you did. So we need to make sure that it's really important that we establish healthy boundaries so that our children can imitate that. And I wish we had more time to discuss these boundaries that we're going to talk about in detail, but we got 30 minutes, so we're going to try to do our best and just cover the main topics. So what do biblical boundaries look like in a marriage? And again, this is with the protection of the covenant in mind. They would look like.
Well, the first one, spiritual boundaries. The verse we're looking at is James 4:8. Draw near to God, and He will draw near to you. So you want to prioritize God first in your marriage. Both spouses should agree that their relationship with God comes first. This includes spending time in prayer together and separately, reading scripture, also worshiping together, as well as individually. Prioritizing God strengthens the foundation of the marriage.
So without this foundation in our marriage, we will see no need for boundaries. And we will take our covenant for granted, and we won't be able to see how important it is to protect it.
Also, maintaining regular worship and fellowship. Attend church services together, Bible studies, join a fellowship group, and other spiritual gatherings. This keeps both partners spiritually aligned and connected with community believers.
So some of you may have been dragged here against your will. Do we have any of those today? Yeah. So you may even feel that all this church stuff isn't for you, right? And as I mentioned before, your children, they don't understand the boundaries that you set in place, and they kick and scream against them. But because you love them, you make boundaries for them. And so your spouse loves you and your covenant, and they don't want the enemy to come in and destroy it.
The second is emotional boundaries. In Proverbs 4:23, it says, "Above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it." And so now we're looking at guarding emotional intimacy. Emotional intimacy should be reserved for your spouse. Sharing deep emotional struggles or personal issues with someone outside of marriage can create emotional bonds that may lead to temptation and emotional affairs.
Sorry about that. So for some of you, you may need to be cautious with even praying over someone of the opposite sex that isn't your spouse. And this isn't to say that you can't ever, do it, but if done often, you're gonna, you may create an emotional bond that could lead you or the other person to seek outside the covenant.
That's right.
You definitely want to set limits on opposite sex with friendships. While friendships with the opposite sex are not inherently wrong, it is wise to set boundaries to ensure the relationships do not become overly intimate or inappropriate. This can include avoiding spending time alone with someone of the opposite sex and being transparent about it, when those interactions or encounters happen with your spouse. For instance, if you have an encounter with a particular person you and your husband set a boundary with, be sure to communicate about it. So it doesn't look like there's some secrecy or something inappropriate happening when there's not.
Yeah, so oftentimes emotional or spiritual immaturity prevents from transparency. We're too afraid to mention a physical attraction to someone else, or someone with of the opposite sex, or to our spouse, right? And in modern times, there are some who struggle with same-sex attraction, and they won't confess that because of the immaturity of their spouse. So we may even withhold information due to fear of how the other would respond. And so I've been seeing that a lot lately in counseling, where couples struggle with telling their spouse, like, I've developed same-sex attraction, as a child, whatever, and they're so afraid to share that thing. But if we don't share these things, that's room for the enemy to come in and attack using that same-sex attraction. So we have to learn to become spiritually and emotionally mature so that we can share things that are difficult with our spouse.
The third one we're looking at is physical boundaries. In 1 Corinthians 6:19 through 20, it says, "Do you not know that your bodies are temples of the Holy Spirit who is in you, whom you have received from God? You are not your own. We are bought at a price. Therefore, honor God with your bodies." So this is taking a look at fidelity and purity. Physical intimacy is a gift from God intended for marriage. Boundaries should be set to protect against temptation, pornography, or engaging in an inappropriate physical contact with others.
So I'm going to be real clear, for those who are withholding sex from each other. It's not an easy thing to hear, but you are being manipulated by Satan. Sexual intimacy was designed to protect your marital covenant. So anytime you're withholding from them, you're going to cause a conflict. You're going to allow the enemy to come in and drive a wedge between you. And I'm not going to lie, like there are times that I withheld because I was upset at her, right? But anytime you withhold from your spouse, you're guiding them into temptation. And so they still have to answer to God for their actions that they did, step out. But you're not innocent in, their downfall either. So we need to make sure we're not allowing the enemy to come in and use our stubbornness or pride to prevent from connection.
And also this, under physical boundaries, is modesty and appearance and action. Dress and act in a way that reflects respect for your spouse and does not invite unwanted attention from others.
So Natalie won't let me wear Daisy Dukes anymore. So that's the hard part. I had to let that go. But I am wearing pants today. For those who had mentioned me wearing shorts yesterday, I did that for y'all.
Stop showing her calves.
I know. Especially Abel, he was staring at my calves a lot. Now, this is often directed towards, women, right? But guys, some of you may even like that your spouse dresses provocatively. And you are inviting the enemy in to target your wife. And so, if that's you, you need to really think about how y'all dress appropriately. You're showing Christ in your covenant. And so, just to kind of, not just, attack women in how they dress, but it can also be this is how men want their wives to dress.
All right. Another point is avoiding prolonged or intimate one-on-one interaction, whether in person or through communication like texting, social media. It's wise to avoid emotionally and intimate relationships with the opposite sex to guard the heart and marriage.
So you may feel that you're able to handle the opposite sex relationships, right? That's one of the things I always hear, that like, oh, I won't do anything, I'm fine, I can handle it. But you never know the other's intentions, right? Or if the other person will develop feelings for you. They may hit a low point in their marriage and now start focusing on you. So you have to put safeguards on these areas. Again, this could also include praying for the opposite sex, again, in a way that touches them inappropriately, which is something I, hear a lot in counsel, especially if you're on the prayer team and you're laying hands on, somebody because they have a chest cold or something like that, want healing. You have to really think about how appropriate is your touch. So the other issue that many don't think about is having doctors of the opposite sex. And that's something that we had to talk about early on that we both, struggled with. But to be able to protect our covenant, to keep, our intimacy safe, and for us to just be known, that may be something that y'all have to think about. If you have a doctor that's female, you're a male, and male, if you're a female, is to be careful and cautious with those interactions.
Also, setting boundaries with friendships. Ensure opposite sex friendships are healthy, transparent, and involve appropriate levels of communication, often including the spouse to maintain that openness.
And Natalie and I will share who we feel safe with, within our lives, and that we allow physical touch to occur. And this includes hugging, holding of hands in prayer, or allowing the opposite sex to touch us in any fashion. We're very cautious and aware of, there may be somebody that has an attraction to her or to me, and so we already kind of talk about that and kind of cut those, things off as, before they even start.
So, just to be completely transparent, we had a mutual friend who was struggling in a church service, and we went up for prayer. And when he came back to sit down, I noticed he was crying, and I felt compelled to reach out and touch his arm, saying, "You're loved, brother." Just before I realized it, he had grabbed my hand and kissed it, and I felt, uncomfortable, and Brian felt uncomfortable, and I definitely felt like a boundary was crossed. And something that, however things happen like this sometimes, right? Unexpectedly, and it can be seemingly, harmless, but you just have to, be aware of it, even though the person may mean well, or you may mean well.
I don't even kiss that hand anymore. It's And the thing is, not all single people understand marital boundaries, and that's what you have to kind of keep in mind.
That's right.
Even though you may have the best intentions to help somebody out, they don't know what you know if they're single, and if they're probably divorced and single, it's probably even worse. So we need to be cautious and aware of that.
The fourth thing is protecting against temptation. Looking at James 4:7, submit yourselves then to God. Resist the devil and he will flee from you. So it says here, flee from sinful situations, right? Make agreements about avoiding places, people, situations that might lead you to temptation or sin. You know your triggers, right? This could mean not engaging in activities that might compromise your faith or your marriage.
Yeah. So this doesn't mean that you can skip church because there's temptation in church. Just letting you know. But it's more like, I passed on jobs that where I would have only worked with women. And there was one job too that it was nothing but younger women. And I was just like, I don't feel this is safe for our marriage. And so I just had to pass on that. And I kept believing that the Lord is going to bring what is necessary for our marriage and to keep it safe. And then there was a time where early on when we started realizing that we stay away from bars and clubs now. And as we were first dating, there was time we'd go
Before kids.
Yeah, before kids, right? Yeah. But the conflict that would happen there all the time, and jealousy would arise and things would happen. And we made a decision not to do it. And then Natalie's friend at one time, it was a new friend. She wanted to make to build a relationship. I was like, oh, you need to go on a pub run with us, and I was like, we just literally yesterday said we were not going to do this. And she's like, but I want to be your friend. And so, fine. And I mean, in that, just when we walked in, I had somebody grab my butt. Like, it was so all these different things happen where we're like, we are not supposed to be here. Like, we need to flee. And so that was the big thing. We're like, we had to tell her, and we left because we were like, we can't do this. The Lord showing us this is not safe for our covenant. So, this also includes the secret temptations you have not told your spouse about. And I talked about setting personal boundaries in counseling. And these personal boundaries are the ones that, we have boundaries kind of set for each other, but these are the ones that you don't tell your spouse about. Like the things that are in your head that you're afraid to share with one another, you have to set personal boundaries for yourself. Because if not, you will cross that line. And so even before, when I first started counseling, 6 years ago, and I would counsel women, I told her, I'm going to counsel at the house with you there, because I didn't know what I was capable of at the time, and I didn't know how much I had grown, and I didn't want to take a chance. And so that was a lot of what I knew in my head. I was like, this might not be a good thing. And so I set these boundaries. And as the Lord started to show me and heal me and grow me in different ways, is where I was like, okay, I think, now at the church, as long as somebody's here, I can counsel. And so when we had to talk about that and see if this was safe for our marriage. And so we have to make sure that there's secret things in your head that you won't tell your spouse. Make sure you put a boundary on that. The other thing that I talk about because of this is limerence. And if you haven't, or you don't know what limerence is, it's a state of mind resulting from romantic feelings for another person that's not your spouse, right? And this is where we believe that the other person is better in so many ways than our spouse. And it makes us feel as though we chose wrong. And this is a big thing in setting those boundaries, is knowing about limerence can help you that if you start developing feelings for someone else and you instantly start thinking, oh, this person's better than my spouse, that's limerence. And you need to flee from that and know that I have to run from that. So that's a big thing that I wanted to share with y'all in that fleeing from temptation.
Also, protecting against temptation means guarding your personal space. Be mindful of situations where you may be alone with someone of the opposite sex, as it can lead to the appearance of impropriety. In 1 Thessalonians 5:22, it says, abstain from all appearance of evil.
Yeah, so this could be having lunch with a coworker of the opposite sex. A lot of times you may just be the first one inside the break room. And then, you know, if it was me and a female came and sat there, I have to be aware that, like, oh, now I'm alone with a female. What does this look like? What boundaries could I set in place? You know, can I sit further away or just kind of keep to myself? I can call my wife if she's available. I want to make sure that I'm not giving off like, oh, yeah, I can just, you know, connect with you and you know, create, you know, something that shouldn't be there. And then this could also be helping out someone of the opposite sex at their home. You know, as Christians, we're wanting to help other people out, and sometimes it could be, you know, there could be a situation where, like, maybe I'm the only one that can go help a female, you know, move a piece of furniture or something. And that's probably something I'm like, I can't move it until this time, right? Also, continuously serving in areas with someone of the opposite sex. And this is something, again, in our church that could happen because we serve a lot, right, in different areas. And so we need to be careful that we're not serving with the same person. And this happens in military families, right? As in, you get deployed different, you know, places, and you're serving with someone over and over again. And that temptation to connect in that, we need to learn to flee. And so if y'all are, you know, military, y'all have to be aware of that that's a possibility.
Now we're going to look at financial boundaries. Proverbs 21:5, it says, the plans of the diligent lead to profit, as surely as haste leads to poverty.
So we can look at this proverb as a financial profit rather than marital success. And I want us to see that as we steward God's resources and see them as much or such, we are less likely to make poor decisions with our blessings.
You want to be transparent with your finances, right? Agree on financial goals together, budget, spending habits. This includes avoiding secret debts or expenditures that could create distrust or division. Open communication about finances helps build trust and unity. And I will say that when we were first married, I'm so thankful that we went through FPU because I was the free spirit and Brian was the nerd, and so we were very different.
And I can't stress enough how important it is to be transparent with the resources that you're stewarding. If you were to give your child $5 for his school lunch and then find out that he bought a bunch of ice cream, are you going to trust his stewardship? And so stewarding your finances together prevents affairs and bitterness in your marriage. So that's another boundary, a financial boundary y'all are going to have to set in place.
Then we're looking at time boundaries. In Ephesians 5:15 through 16, it says, be very careful then how you live, not as unwise, but as wise, making the most of every opportunity because the days are evil. So you want to prioritize time together, make time for one another regularly, nurturing the relationship. This may include weekly date nights, regular family activities, because sometimes the kids are going to be there, right? And setting aside time for meaningful conversation without distraction, as much as you can.
Yeah. And your children are going to be distractions, or they can be an excuse for making time together. So just as we need to spend time with God to ensure that we protect the covenant between Him and us, we need to do that the same for our marriage.
Also, balance work and home life. This has been a challenge for us, but you want to set limits on how much time is spent on work, hobbies, or other commitments outside the marriage. Ensure that your spouse feels valued and prioritized. And this often means saying no to some things.
As Robert shared, right, and there's in busy schedules, and I had just mentioned Natalie too, with being a teacher and then getting her LPC, there were many times I had to tell her, shut it off. Like, shut your brain off, stop working on these things, and prioritize, be here. If your work is the priority over your spouse and family, then you will have to live with that outcome when you no longer have them. And so this can also include how much time you spend at your parents' house, right? This comes down to the leaving and cleaving, right? So this often happens with women as they tend to be closer to their family. But there's some mama's boys out there, I'm pretty sure. But one of the things I wanted to do is we looked at the diagram, right? Anytime one of those numbers are out of place, right? So God for a spouse, family, ministry, and work. And if you're lucky, sometimes the ministry and work are the same. Like for me, as a biblical counselor, it's my job, so I need to do both, right? Doesn't mean I don't serve in other areas, but that's fortunately the same for me. Now, if you put your spouse before God, we have to remember God is a just God. So conflict's going to happen, right? If you put ministry or work before your spouse is going to have a righteous jealousy. And you may think it's like, oh, I have to provide, and this is, how are we going to pay for things? But you have to learn how to prioritize. Any of those out of place, it can come to your children. If you put ministry before your children will resent God. And so we need to make sure that we prioritize these correctly.
The next one is accountability boundaries. In Ecclesiastes 4:9-10, 2 are better than 1 because they have a good return for their labor. If either of them falls down, one can help the other up. But pity anyone who falls and has no one to help them up. So you want to stay accountable to each other. Regularly discuss spiritual, emotional, and personal goals and challenges. Consider having trusted Christian mentors. We're very blessed that we have some great Christian mentors and over couples that help each other keep one another accountable in faith and in your marriage.
And so most of you probably want to keep your stuff private, or some of you probably shove it under the rug. And
that's where I come from. My background is, in my family, we shoved everything under the rug, and you just don't air out your dirty laundry and whatnot. But that actually early on hurt our marriage because that was my go-to. And so, I had to grow and learn, and thankfully God, is good and gracious, and He showed me how to, be accountable with Brian, and also tell other couples that could really bless and pour into us. You also want to set boundaries for media and technology. Agree on boundaries regarding the use of social media, texting, technology. This could be being transparent with your passwords, avoiding inappropriate content, and ensuring that technology does not replace that face-to-face conversation. So easy to do that. I've seen some couples that just text each other in their house. We've done that before, but they don't even talk.
Most of the time we're joking with each other. But in this day and age, right, marriages are being destroyed by what they call doom scrolling, right? Not to mention the temptation to view pornography or other types of apps that have provocative content on them, and y'all know what those are. So that's a big area. The password thing. So many times I hear that I don't have access to my partner's phone, and that's something that cannot be done in your marriage. There has to be full transparency. Right. Anybody who's hiding their phone from their spouse, you may be already crossing the line for something. You need to start backtracking and again, fleeing from temptation. One of the other things that deals with media that Natalie and I did early on, even like as we were engaged, we talked about like, what is Facebook going to look like for us? And this was like many moons ago, but probably like 16, 17 years ago. But we decided like we had so much conflict with exes and different things that were, that didn't need to be had. And so we were like looking at, we don't really even care about media, but we have our families on there. So one of the biggest things we decided was like, we're just gonna merge our accounts. And it was something again where it's like, protect the covenant, stop caring about what other people think. We get all the time on our Facebook, who cheated? None of us. But we're smart and we don't have the drama that you probably have. So it was something that we just kind of like, I was married once before, didn't set boundaries, didn't think about how do I protect the covenant. And so y'all need to start thinking about that, as some of y'all probably have things on your account that you shouldn't, right?
The next boundary we're looking at is communication. In Ephesians 4:29, it says, "Do not let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouths, but only what is helpful for building others up according to their needs, that it may benefit those who listen." So you want to speak with your spouse with kindness and respect. Commit to communicating in that way with love and respect, even during disagreements. Avoid harmful language, insulting, shouting, name calling.
Beating me again. So what you say may lead your spouse out of the boundaries, and the enemy may use it to justify your actions to sin. So we need to be cautious on how we speak to one another.
Yeah, ladies, this means, we heard this one time saying that you either speak to a king or you speak to a fool.
Yeah, and that goes to say, like, early on in our marriage, she would always say, he's gonna cheat, he's gonna do this, he's this, and he's that, and I just kept feeling like, that's not who I am. But there were times where I'm just like, I was so fed up, I'm like, I just might as well do it, so that I have something to be blamed for. And your words really matter in how you speak to your spouse. They're very powerful, right? Like a rudder, a ship rudder. So y'all need to be cautious in that. And it goes the same for men. Like, you need to start speaking to your wives as they are a queen, they're a princess of the Most High. And stop treating them like they're any less.
Also, resolve conflicts biblically. Agree to address conflicts in a healthy biblical manner, because that's where all the answers are. Such as speaking the truth in love, seeking forgiveness from one another, and striving for peace and reconciliation.
So part of being able to resolve conflict and stay within boundaries is getting over yourself. That takes dying to self, right? But you can't do this without understanding why you do what you do. So if you know me or you've been around me enough, you've probably heard about groups, right? And understanding why you can't do some of these or struggle with these things will help protect your marriage. And so when, some of y'all are, seeking counsel, you'll start understanding how the enemy makes you see life and how you choose to sin without realizing it. And that all comes down to the root. And this kind of leads to the last point.
So we did go very quickly through, all these boundaries, but if you feel like, you need more help, you can seek professional or pastoral guidance. This is so important. It says in Proverbs 15:22, "Plans fail for lack of counsel, but with many advisors they succeed." So, you and your spouse can agree to seek help when needed and recognize that sometimes outside help is necessary. Set a boundary that if either partner feels stuck or really overwhelmed, they'll seek counseling from a pastor or Christian counselor.
So there are, just some things a friend cannot do or give advice about. And you need to allow your partner to seek professional help, even if it may come at a cost. Guys, you're gonna spend money to do your oil change and maintenance on your vehicles, making them look nicer, but you forget that your marriage needs that also. And women, some of you may maintain your home, update things in it as they get old or fade, but your marriage will fade if you don't invest in it.
That's right.
And so God will provide the resources, and there's probably a way if you look at your finances together, right, to be able to allow your spouse to seek the help that's necessary. The whole goal, again, is protect the covenant, right? My cards are also in the back as I'm a biblical counselor, and anybody that needs to seek out counsel, well, I know a good one, right? So, hopefully, right? But that's the boundaries in a nutshell, guys. And again, as y'all go out, remember, protect that covenant. It's not about what she needs to do or what I need to do. It's about how do we protect our marriage at all costs.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank
Thank
you,
y'all.
guys.
Yeah, can we give Brian and Natalie one more round of applause? Thank you. That was very helpful, very insightful. Well, hey, we're going to go on a quick 10-minute break, so feel free to stand up, stretch your legs, grab some snacks in the back, and we will be back in this room in 10 minutes.